Solo Leveling by Chugong. Chapter 45. The one trying to enter and the ones trying to leave. Reporters from all over the world flocked to Japan. Most were war correspondents who had experience on the battlefield, proving that covering this story was much like setting foot inside a war zone. Security around the gate was tight. The reporters aimed their cameras toward the divination circle encompassing the massive gate and the surrounding army. The tension in the air was palpable, and it felt like the peace could get shattered at any moment. William Bell, a famous English war correspondent, was there with his assistant, who swallowed hard before posing a question. "The most advanced firearms don't work on magic beasts, so why is the military here?" William took pictures of the soldiers' resolute expressions as he replied, "To buy some time." "What?" "They'll draw attention to themselves to buy time for hunters to prepare their attack. They'll also be bait, so people like us and the higher-ups watching can escape." Koshak. The next picture he took was of Shigeo Matsumoto, president of the Hunters Association of Japan. He looked grim as he stood near the gate, discussing things with other officials. "Well, I guess there's nothing to smile about here." Koshak. "You mean?" The inexperienced assistant looked apprehensive. "They're human shields?" "Hey, don't knock it." "Huh? You're here as my human shield." "Excuse me?" The assistant was flabbergasted. William elbowed him in the ribs. "Loosen up. You'll get yourself killed if you're this tense." He winked, and the young man sighed in relief. "I can't believe Mr. Bell can even joke at a time like this." The novice reporter was able to center himself after seeing how relaxed his mentor was. However, he also knew that William made light of a situation only during the darkest times. The young man craned his neck to look up at the gate. "What's going to come out?" William's finger paused on the shutter button and followed his assistant's gaze. The gate was huge to the point where it overwhelmed everyone. Ever since gates began appearing, they had become secondary battlefields for war correspondents, which meant that William had covered many at this point. He had even once covered a dungeon break, but the one above him was on a different level. Just looking at it made him begin to sweat. No wonder they didn't bother sending in a reconnaissance team. None of the high-rank hunters had dared to step foot in the dungeon, even for a short time, so the magic beasts it contained were a mystery. William eventually murmured, "I don't know what will come out of there, but..." He smiled bitterly. "I hope Yuri Orlov's force field is strong enough to hold it back." Lastly, his camera focused on Yuri, who was inspecting his barrier. The Russian was beaming. "Excellent. It's perfect." Yuri had absolute confidence in his creation. His barrier was impressive. On top of that, due to fear of public backlash, President Matsumoto had kept it a secret that he was paying the Russian. So the Japanese people were under the impression that Yuri had taken this job out of the goodness of his heart. As a result, the people of Japan had donated a huge sum of money for his sake. The best part was that he was now a media darling. Dozens of reporters had risked their lives to come to this perilous place and cover Yuri's story. He'd amassed fame and fortune, everything Yuri loved, from just one job. He emphasized once more, "It's perfect." Today he would go down in history as the first man to block an S-rank gate all by himself. I would have liked the title of the first man to clear an S-rank gate by himself, but no matter. Unfortunately, that title had already been claimed by another hunter. He was a brawler, and Yuri was a support-type hunter, making it apples and oranges. Yuri was satisfied with being the best in his field. That's right. The cocky Russian pulled a flask out of his inner pocket. A strong whiff of alcohol came from the container. "Mr. Orlov, You can't drink. The association employee in charge of handling the Star Hunter tried to stop him, but Yuri shot him a glare. I'm having a celebratory drink. A toast. Relax, you're about to witness the best show ever. Be but still. Want a sip? It'll calm your nerves. President Matsumoto frowned as Yuri slung an arm around the handler's shoulders and nudged the flask at him. I can't believe the fate of Japan is in the hands of a man like that. He tooted and turned to his secretary. How many S-rank hunters are on standby? 3 in total, sir. 3, huh? Only 3 S-rank hunters out of more than 10 had responded to the association's call. President Matsumoto's wrinkles deepened. His influence among the hunters was at an all-time low following the disaster at Jeju Island. Some even blamed his greed for the deaths of the S-rank hunters. Most of the remaining S-ranks had turned their backs on him, with some even proclaiming that they wouldn't heed the association's orders as long as he remained president. If only Ruji were still with me. President Matsumoto's fists trembled. Ruji Goto used to be his right-hand man, and his death had been an incredibly painful loss. But because of what happened today would be extremely important. If the S-rank gate could be successfully blocked by the efforts of the Hunters Association, he would redeem himself. Gun-He-Go and Jin-Woo-sung. And someday, Matsumoto might be able to return the humiliation he faced at the hands of those two. No matter what it takes. It had to happen. President Matsumoto solemnly watched the gate. His secretary checked the time and whispered to him. 3 minutes before the dungeon break, sir. Got it. Acknowledged President Matsumoto. Countless thoughts flew through his mind as he stared at the hole in the sky. 2 minutes, 1 minute and 59 seconds, 58 seconds. Time flew by like an arrow shot from a bow, until the black membrane blocking the entrance finally began fading. The reporters shouted, "Ah! The gate is open! H, here they come!" Jin-Woo. Jin-Woo had tried to sneak out, but he obediently sat back down. His mother looked over her shoulder from the TV to him. The S-rank gate in Japan was all over the news, and most networks were counting down to the dungeon break. You're not heading out somewhere, are you? Sometimes, a mother's intuition was sharper than a high-rank hunter's perception. Guilt pricked at him, but Jin-Woo answered nonchalantly. I made plans with someone. Plans? On a day like this? I made them a while back. I didn't cancel them, since the gate is in Japan, so it has nothing to do with me. His mother eyed him suspiciously, but Jin-Woo wasn't technically lying. I kind of made a previous engagement with the system. Kyung-hae stared at him for a moment before asking, So I don't have to be worried? Jin-Woo responded firmly. No, you don't. He'd been strengthening himself to avoid just that. Seeing the confidence in her son's eyes, Kyung-hae finally cracked a smile. All right. Stay safe. Jin-Woo returned her smile. I'm off. With that, he left the apartment. Their unit was located on the 9th floor, and for the first time, Jin-Woo realized how slow the elevator was. He was feeling impatient because he was excited to see what kind of dungeon the black key would open. Ding! The elevator doors opened on the first floor, and a middle-aged man whom Jin-Woo had never seen before made eye contact with him. Apparently, the man had no idea an S-rank hunter lived in the building, because his eyes widened as he recognized Jin-Woo. Huh? Jin-Woo walked past him and put up his hood. His steps quickened, fueled by his eagerness. Once he was outside the apartment complex, he checked his surroundings. Maybe it's because of the gate in Japan? The streets were dead, so Jin-Woo was able to take his time checking on the black key without worrying about prying eyes. Item: Cardinal Temple's key. Acquisition difficulty? Category: Key. The required conditions have been fulfilled. This key unlocks the entrance to the Kartanon Temple. You can use it at the designated gate. The location of the designated gate will be revealed after the allotted time passes. Remaining time: 1 minute and 2 seconds. Just over a minute left. It's almost time. His heart started fluttering. Ba-dump, be-a-dump. He spent the final minute listening to his heartbeat. There was no need to check the time. Due to his extreme training, his mental clock was more accurate than any timepiece in the world. 3, 2, 1. Jin-Woo opened his eyes after exactly 1 minute. Beep. Remaining time: midnight. The location of the designated gate will be revealed. Jin-Woo startled. But that? The location of the gate indicated by the system wasn't far from him. In fact, it was somewhere familiar. Using his Hunter-issue phone to access the association's website, he searched it up, and sure enough, there was a recent record of a gate appearing there. Who knew that would be where Jin-Woo could use the key? It felt like someone had pulled the rug out from under him. I misunderstood the description. The system hadn't misinformed him. It had said the location of the gate would be revealed, but it never mentioned that a new gate would spawn. Jin-Woo kind of felt like he'd been tricked. His fingers were a blur over the phone screen. The records indicated that a guild had already started a raid, and measurements indicated it to be a C-rank gate. It's not high rank, but the problem was that no one knew what was hidden inside. Good thing it's nearby. The gate was 10 minutes away by car, and if he ran at full speed, he could get there in 60 seconds. He turned invisible using stealth and sprinted to his destination using flash. The location was the yard at Gina's high school. Since the school was temporarily closed subsequent to the work episode, it was unlikely that any civilians were in harm's way. But the strike squad is in danger. Jin-Woo recalled the first time he had ventured into the underground temple. It had been one horror after another, with multiple near-death experiences. And yet, the memories were frightening and traumatic to be sure, but they also made Jin-Woo's heart race. Ironically, the temple had made Jin-Woo feel alive for the first time in his life. In that moment, he hadn't been a useless C-rank hunter, but rather a challenger of the impossible. After weaving his way through a few alleys, Jin-Woo spotted the school up ahead. He really had arrived at the school in about a minute. The entrance to the dungeon floated in a corner of the schoolyard, and there were a few guild and association employees minding it. Everything looked calm, with nothing major to report. Jin-Woo's appearance broke the peace as he deactivated stealth and approached them. Huh? The guild members belatedly spotted him and rushed to block his path. You're not allowed in this area. Jin-Woo pulled down his hood and revealed his face. There was an audible gasp to one side of him. You? The association employee assigned to the gate recognized Jin-Woo. It was the same woman with glasses whom Jin-Woo had encountered at the B-rank gate in the middle of the highway. Jin-Woo figured it would be easier to settle things with her, so he ignored the guild members and addressed her. You need to stop the raid right now. Excuse me? She sounded nonplussed. But according to the measurements, it's only a C-rank gate. Jin-Woo shook his head. If you don't, they'll all die. He turned to look at the gate. Couldn't they sense the bone-chilling, ominous energy emanating from inside? How long have they been in there? Jin-Woo hurriedly asked. The longer they'd been inside, the farther they'd have gotten, so the lower their chances of survival. In her bewilderment, the association employee responded. It's been about 2 hours. 2 hours. It was hard to say if that was a long time or no time at all. Who the hell are you? You with the association? One of the guild members grabbed Jin-Woo by the shoulder and tried to turn him around. He was irritated at this stranger, who had appeared out of nowhere, ignored most of the people in the area, and spouted off inflammatory nonsense about their strike squad being in danger. His grip was weak, but Jin-Woo went with the flow and faced the man. Revealing his face would be more effective than trying to explain the situation in detail. When someone asks you a question, the guild member paused as he took in the other man's features. Wait a minute. I've seen him somewhere before. But where? When the name came to him, he stammered. HH Hunter Jin-Woo's song? He never expected to meet an S-rank hunter in front of a C-rank gate. And he grabbed his shoulder and yelled at him. The shocked staff member removed his hand and retreated a few steps. I'm sorry, sir. The clock was still ticking, so Jin-Woo didn't have time to waste on the rude newcomer. He turned to the woman from the association. I'll bring them back. The representative was flustered. Here was the man who had exited a B-rank red gate with a smile. Yet he appeared devastated and convinced that the squad inside this C-rank gate was in danger. What's going on? If you could just explain it to me. There's no time for that. Jin-Woo cut her off. Truthfully, he could have sneaked inside using stealth. There were also a handful of ways to draw these people's attention away from the gate. However, Jin-Woo refrained from doing so because he wanted to cover his bases in case of unforeseen complications down the line. The association employee opened and closed her mouth several times as she debated what to do. Would it be okay to let another hunter go inside without any evidence of danger when a guild with an official permit was already in the middle of the raid? In theory, it was unacceptable, but she couldn't bring herself to stop Jin-Woo, given the look in his eyes. Please go ahead. I'll see you later. Jin-Woo gave a short nod and quickly ran through the gate. You have entered the dungeon. Carcasses of magic beasts were scattered throughout the dungeon, with their essence stones already extracted. Unlike the dead bodies of magic beasts from high-rank dungeons, which were worth a fortune, those from low-rank dungeons were valuable only for their essence stones. This was a familiar scene to Jin-Woo. He closed his eyes and focused, but for some reason, he couldn't detect the presence of the strike squad. Could they already be? Jin-Woo shook his head. The bodies of the recently deceased hunters would release mana, but he couldn't sense that either. As Jin-Woo inspected his surroundings, he was suddenly hit with a feeling of déjà vu. This place somehow seemed familiar, like he had seen this exact dungeon before. Oh! It was a replica of the dungeon where Jin-Woo had first received his powers. That means he found the spot where the entrance to the double dungeon had been, and sure enough, there it was. It's just like that time. He then realized why he couldn't sense any of the hunters. This dungeon is insanely huge. It had been that way the last time, too. Even if they moved at the speed of low-rank hunters, it would still have taken them almost an hour to reach the strange door. If this dungeon truly did have the same layout, then there was a significant distance between himself and the strike squad. No wonder he couldn't detect the presence of the hunters, who possessed such small quantities of mana. Jin-Woo stared into the passageway. There was only one tunnel, and just like back then, the way was pitch black. However, that didn't bother Jin-Woo. His increased perception allowed him to detect the path hidden in the dark. His eyes glowed blue, like those of an animal with night vision. I can see. Jin-Woo's eyes adjusted to the darkness, allowing him to make out the interior of the tunnel clearly. Phew. Jin-Woo took a deep breath and then shot off like a bullet. He put quite some distance behind him in the blink of an eye. I can't believe it used to take me almost an hour. His speed now was incomparable to what it had been back then. he suddenly picked up on something. It was the strike squad. They'd come to a stop, and at first, Jin-Woo thought that either they were in the middle of a battle or perhaps even dead. However, that wasn't the case. As he approached, he heard their voices. "So you just want to turn around even though we're already here?" Tack. Jin-Woo stopped not far from the hunters and couldn't help but snort at the familiar conversation. He was relieved though, since the strike squad hadn't yet set foot inside. They wouldn't have been arguing so casually otherwise. He heard a woman's voice next. "Then what do we do? We couldn't open the door even after throwing all our magic spells at it. Isn't it better to turn back and strike a deal with a larger guild?" "I think that's best too." The hunters were arguing in front of the door they couldn't open. Jin-Woo understood their thinking. They probably believed they had struck it rich after discovering the double dungeon and didn't want to make another 1-hour trek empty-handed. He, a survivor of a similar predicament, decided to speak up. "It's a trap." The hunters hadn't noticed his approach, so his sudden interjection startled them and made them recoil. "Son of a... who are you?" Jin-Woo pointed his chin toward the gigantic steel door from his memories. "I'm a survivor of the double dungeon." "A survivor of a double dungeon?" The hunters exchanged looks and whispered among themselves. In the darkness, it took a while for them to recognize Jin-Woo. "Wait, what? Isn't that Hunter Jin-Woo's song?" "Huh?" Everyone stared at the hunter who had said Jin-Woo's name, then at Jin-Woo himself. "Now that you mention it, it's really him, isn't it? But what brings an S-rank hunter here?" Jin-Woo strode forward, and the hunters near the entry automatically made way for him. He gently placed his hand on the entrance. "I know what lies beyond these doors." It felt somewhat different standing in this spot again. But this was not the time to be sentimental. The system itself had invited him here, so he couldn't tolerate gate crashers, either for their sake or his own. Jin-Woo turned and spoke to them gravely. "This is a horrifically dangerous place. You should turn back. I'll take it from here." The strike squad's discontented mutters grew louder, but they kept their thoughts to themselves because Jin-Woo was a well-known S-rank hunter. But there's always one in every group, and the man who didn't want to go back empty-handed eventually stepped up. "Excuse me, Hunter Sung." He was the master of the mid-sized guild managing this raid. "The Bravery Guild acquired the permit to raid this dungeon fair and square. You don't have the right to tell us to leave." "Yeah. You think you can do whatever just because you're an S rank?" Jin-Woo pursed his lips at their protests. He'd been trying to help them as a gesture of goodwill, but he had no intention of trying harder to persuade them. "I'm not obliged to do anything here." Jin-Woo had done everything that could be expected of him. As someone who knew the price other low-rank hunters, including himself, had paid for the decision made regarding this place, he hadn't wished it upon these hunters. However, he would let them make their own choices. He went ahead and grabbed the doorknob. Clung. Despite his exertions, the door wouldn't open. Is there a magic spell on it? Otherwise, there was no way this door would be so immovable. Just then, there came a chime. "The door to the Kartinon Temple is currently locked. Please use the key." Ah, no wonder. Jin-Woo summoned the black key, and the door swung open as soon as he inserted it into the keyhole. Kriawalk. The Bravery Guild stared in surprise at the previously impenetrable doors. "Huh? What the? How did he open it?" Jin-Woo ignored their whispers and coldly warned them. "Feel free to enter. I won't stop you. Just know that once you're inside, it won't be easy to come back out alive." The strike squad froze, unable to take the cautionary words coming from an S-rank hunter lightly. But in true bravery guild fashion, the guild master courageously stepped up to the plate. "I'll go in." Jin-Woo didn't try to stop him. It was their call, so they'd have to deal with the consequences. The guild master looked back at his colleagues, but they exchanged looks and didn't move to accompany him. The guild master glared at his squad in disappointment, then stood in front of the door. Jin-Woo held it open for him. Boom! The heavy door swung inward. Looking quite determined, the guild master briefly made eye contact with Jin-Woo and, after wavering slightly, worked up his courage and set one foot inside the room. As he did, Jin-Woo received a few alerts. Ping, ping, ping! A trespasser has entered the temple. Entry is denied. Failure to follow instructions will activate the doorkeepers. Only Jin-Woo saw the system's warning, and so, oblivious to what was waiting, the guild master took another step. Whoosh! A hammer fell toward his head. Kroom! It crushed the stone tile he was standing on. Arg! Jin-Woo had pulled the man out of harm's way just in time, saving him from losing his head. Ayo! The guild master freaked out as doorkeepers grabbed at him. Jin-Woo threw him outside the room and quickly closed the door. The entire room is like that. He turned to address the group. Still want to go inside? The guild master vigorously shook his head from his spot on the ground. His colleagues helped him up and carried him away. After they were out of sight, Jin-Woo went through the door alone. Ping! The keeper of the key has entered. Thud! The door closed. The room was enormous. Statues lined the walls, the largest of which sat looming in the farthest part of the hall. It was all just as he remembered. I'm back. His heart pounded. One thing had changed, though, Jin-Woo himself. The newly evolved Jin-Woo could now tell the true nature of the statues. They're not magic beasts or living beings. They were mere puppets connected to something else. Only one being in the room possessed magic power, and it hid its mana so well that the only way Jin-Woo could single it out was by its strange, sinister aura. He slowly walked to a specific statue. So it was you. No response. That's how you want to play it. Jin-Woo's lips twitched up, and he swiftly stabbed his dagger into his target's chest. Crack! The attack was blocked by a stone slate held by the only statue armed with one. Finally, the statue with 6 wings smiled beatifically. You've made it. Magic beasts began emerging from the humongous gate in Shinjuku. Stomp! Stomp! Whoa! What are? They were giants, the kind of magic beasts that sometimes appeared as bosses in top-ranking A-rank dungeons. Giants! They're giants! Everyone watching recoiled in fear, but Yuri took a sip from his flask. I can handle this, no problem. These magic beasts instilled chills in others, but Yuri was adamant that his work was flawless. Come at me! And as he expected, bam, wham, the giants struck in vain at the invisible wall blocking them. Thud, thud, the beasts charged and threw their bodies against the force field, but the Russians' divination circle held. Ah! Yuri chortled at the sight. After struggling for half an hour, the giants retreated as if weary from trying to break down the barrier. The spectators exclaimed in surprise. Oh my God! The magic beasts are going back inside the gate? No one had ever seen or even heard of anything like this before, and even the most seasoned journalists snapped pictures as if their lives depended on it at this heretofore undocumented phenomenon. As the last giant disappeared from view, President Matsumoto rose to his feet and applauded. Clap, 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 clap. One clap turned into a succession, which transformed into sighs of relief, and finally cheers. But who? At the enthusiastic reception, Yuri faced the reporters. "This is something only I could do. I blocked this S-rank gate," he shouted at the top of his lungs. "That other dude only killed a couple ants, but I turned those giants back. Who's the man now?" Yuri's face was flush red from the alcohol, and he grinned to show off his gold tooth. Stomp! The ground shook. Stomp! The military tanks on standby shook from the force. Yuri finally realized that the reporters were no longer looking at him, but at the gate. He followed their gazes and dropped his flask of vodka. Clank! Oh hell! The hunter's eyes popped out of his skull at the behemoth emerging from the gate that dwarfed the other giants. As it stood up straight, Yuri couldn't wrap his head around its sheer size. How is it so big that it had to duck to come through? No explanation was needed to know that this was the boss of the dungeon. The terrifying creature scanned the area and then charged at the invisible wall. Boom! The sound resonated and made the ground quake. Boom! 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 The divination circle, visible only to Yuri, began showing hairline fractures. How is this happening? The hunter collapsed to his knees. The boss stopped pushing against the barrier with its shoulder, then purposefully drew back and threw itself at the wall at full speed. Kaboom! The light of the divination circle dissipated with an explosive concussion. And no! No sooner had Yuri let out a wail than the freed giant snatched up the human responsible for the barrier. The Russian cried out at the pain of feeling his bones snap and struggled to escape the giant's grip. Aard! Ah! The hunter's screams were cut off as the behemoth opened its mouth. The smaller giants that had retreated inside the gate now poured out from behind their leader, who had swallowed Yuri whole. Creak, creak, creak. An odd sound came from the statue's joints as it began to move. Jin-Woo eyed it warily. The creature had several differences from the other statues, but its most distinguishable feature was its wings. It was the only depiction of an angel and had 6 wings attached, standing tall at an imposing 3 meters. Whip! Jin-Woo quickly took a few steps back and lowered his center of gravity, gripping a dagger in each hand. Determined to fight, his mind, body, and senses optimized for battle. Despite sensing Jin-Woo's desire to fight, the angel grinned. Its smile was creepy and unnatural, giving Jin-Woo goosebumps. It looked down at its damaged stone slate and tossed it aside without a second thought. Crash! Naturally, the slate shattered into several pieces upon hitting the ground. The angel statue laughed stiffly at the broken shards. Ha! Jin-Woo's eyes narrowed. Then this whole time, the commandments on the stone slate had been meaningless from the start. Otherwise, the statue wouldn't have treated it so carelessly. So then, what was this place for? And what did it want? And what was the point of the quests, level-ups, keys, and all the strange occurrences that had happened after he left this place? This was Jin-Woo's opportunity to get some answers, and the thought excited him. Ba-dump, be-a-dump, be-a-dump. His usually steady heart seemed to be slamming against his ribs, like an engine that had been revved. This thing knows everything. Without dropping his guard, Jin-Woo prompted in a low voice. Are you the one who called me here? What was the relationship between the system and the statue? Yes. The angel statue tested the joints of its fingers. You successfully made your way back. It then tested its neck, rotating it to the right and left. Crick, crack. Crick. It was stretching, and it wasn't hard to guess why. Normally, Jin-Woo wouldn't have missed a chance to get in the first attack, but he held back this time. He had so many things he wanted to ask the angel, and didn't want to waste his chance by engaging it in battle. Are you a magic beast? The magic power radiating from the angel statue was different from that of a magic beast. However, the term magic beast was a human construct anyway. If the term encompassed all monsters, then this was a statue that could talk and move. And was there anything more monstrous than that? In other words, Jin-Woo wanted to know if the statue and magic beasts were one and the same. Creak, 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 creak. Creak, creak, crack. The angel statue bent to reach its toes, and then straightened up again. You're asking the wrong question. You should have asked me who you are instead of who I am. Jin-Woo froze, momentarily stunned, but the angel clapped to get his attention. Clap. Now, this will be the final test. The statue finished warming up, and its smile faded. If you're still standing when this test is over, I will tell you everything. That will be... The angel snapped its fingers, and the eyes of the other statues glowed red. Your reward from me. The rest of the stone figures' heads snapped toward Jin-Woo. Stomp! They stepped off their pedestals and raised their weapons. Jin-Woo looked at each in turn. Even though they were only puppets, they looked powerful and had almost killed him on more than one occasion. Jin-Woo calmly summoned his shadow soldiers. Come out. Ping. Job-exclusive skills may not be used during the final test. The use of potions and the shop are forbidden. Condition recovery rewards gained through leveling up and quest completion have been disabled. You may not leave until the final test is ended. What? Jin-Woo frowned at each message, but he didn't have time to dwell on any of them. The statues began their attack. They moved quickly and quietly, a sharp contrast from the hundreds of knights that had mobbed him during the job change quest. So that's how it's gonna be, huh? The different kinds of potions and quest rewards he prepared just in case had gone up in flames. The system knew Jin was tricked well by this point. Fine, I'll pass this test under my own power. Jin-Woo resolutely tightened his grip on the daggers. The fastest way to end the crisis would be to take out the puppeteer, the angel statue. However, Jin-Woo wouldn't get what he was here for if he did that. He'd save that as his last resort. First, he'd comply and take its test. It was all for this moment. Jin-Woo had never stopped bettering himself, so he would be able to tackle any given situation without faltering. The hunter exhaled a warm puff of air. In the past, the statues had moved so fast that, to the naked eye, it seemed like they were using teleportation. But now, he was able to follow their movements easily. Left. He blocked a spear coming from the left with his dagger. Clang. Left again. Another statue leaped off the shoulders of the attacker with a spear and swung down its axe. Since attempting to block a strike from above wouldn't be efficient, Jin-Woo chose to dodge it by twisting his body in a half circle. Crash! The axe struck the ground and sent fragments of stone flying everywhere. Jin-Woo kicked the statue's face with all his might. Crock! Its head exploded into pieces. Whish! Jin-Woo bent his torso backward to avoid an arrow, which lodged in the wall behind him. The relentless attacks left no time to celebrate getting rid of one of them. Right side. A sword swung toward him. Shing! Clang! Jin-Woo pushed away the sword with all his strength using one dagger, and brought the other across in a diagonal slash. Shunk! He sliced off the statue's arm and sent it stumbling backward, writhing in pain. Left, right, right, left, front, front, right, left. I've got this. The harder Jin-Woo focused on the battle, the slower the statues. Movement seemed as his own grew faster. Suddenly, he sensed a chill on the back of his neck. Behind me. Jin-Woo leaped over a statue approaching from the rear and lopped off its head. Slash. Thanks to his perception stat, he was covered on all sides. You? He let out a heavy sigh. Each nerve in his body was attuned to the statue's every move. His eyes burned bright as he parried, blocked, and repelled every blow and cut down the number of tenacious statues. This is the moment I've been waiting for. He easily sliced through his assailants with the demon monarch's daggers, as if they'd been made to cut through stone. His body, mind, nerves, and daggers had fused to make an unstoppable machine. The angel statue shivered in delight as it carefully observed Jin-Woo. He's moving well for a human. A smile returned to the angel's face. It had made the right choice. However, the test was far from over. The angel statue turned to gaze upon the colossus seated on a huge throne. Its eyes turned bright red, as if it had been awaiting its cue, and it gripped the armrests of the throne and heaved itself to its feet. Rumble. The colossus's size alone was enough to send chills up one's spine. Boom! The entire lair shook as it took its first step. Boom, boom, boom! Because of its enormous stride, it reached Jin-Woo in a few steps. A mound of broken statues surrounded the hunter. The monstrosity stopped in front of the heap and raised its right arm. Amid his intense battle with the other statues, Jin-Woo sensed something strange. He looked up as something cast a shadow over him. A gigantic hand came into view as the colossus forcefully smacked the ground with no regard for its smaller brethren. Crash! Jin-Woo flung his body to the side and rolled on the ground a few times before finally getting up, having successfully avoided its palm. Jin-Woo's face hardened as he registered his new opponent. Right. That's a thing. Out of the frying pan and into the fire. There were at least 100 statues still alive and charging toward him at full speed. His opponent soon caught up to him. He changed the direction of a mace speeding toward him by tapping it with his dagger. He then smoothly slid in front of the puppet and severed its neck. Thud. As that statue's head hit the ground, the one right behind it took its place. However, that wasn't the real danger. Jin-Woo felt all the hairs on his body stand on end. He flinched and quickly looked up. An eerie red light was growing in intensity within the colossus's eyes. Is it too late to avoid it? He'd be liquefied by the giant's heat vision if he went the wrong way and found his path blocked by the other statues. In that case, he dropped the dagger in his left hand and reached toward the oncoming foot soldiers. Ruler's hand. 5 of the statues were smushed together by Ruler's hand. Ping. Skill. Ruler's hand has been upgraded to its ultimate version. Skill. Ruler's authority. Nice. But there was no time to celebrate. Jin-Woo moved his makeshift shield directly in the path of the giant's eyes. Zazup! As Jin-Woo had predicted, a red laser shot forward. ZZZZZT! While it took less than a second for his shield to melt from the heat vision, that was enough time for Jin-Woo to make his escape. The remains of the statues fell to the ground as he deactivated Ruler's authority. Thud. Jin-Woo changed his tactic now that he'd gotten a look at what the Colossus could do to its companions. I knew I should have taken it down first. His goal set, Jin-Woo sprang into action right before the second beam was fired. Flash. With his elevated speed, Jin-Woo was now moving so quickly that the Colossus couldn't track him. He arrived at the behemoth's feet and squatted, focusing all energy on his legs. He only had one chance. It would be near impossible to dodge the red beam in midair, but if Jin-Woo had learned one thing, it was that you missed every shot you didn't take. So do me a favor. Determined, Jin-Woo launched himself with all his might. His body shot up like a rocket. Hurry up and die.